would like to call the meeting of the Board of Directors of the Des Moines Public Schools to order for October 17th, 2017. Please take the roll.
Natasha Newcomb.
Here.
Ms. Delagar Del Shelley.
Here.
Ms. Langford.
Here.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson.
Here.
Ms. Ellsburn.
Here.
Ms. Anderson.
Here.
Mr. Barron.
The first item on our agenda this evening is approval of the agenda. Are there any special requests to pull items? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion and a second to approve the agenda.
Approval.
Second. We have a motion from Ellsburn and a second from Anderson. Please vote. Agenda is approved, 7-0. The next item on our agenda is the minutes for our business meeting of October 3rd, 2017. Any discussions or corrections before we move to a motion? Hearing none, please, I'll take a motion.
Second.
We have a motion from Ellsburn, a second from De La Gardelle Shelley. Please vote. Motion carries 7-0. Before continuing with our regular meeting, I would like to remind the audience that we allow any person the opportunity to speak to the board for 5 minutes following the presentation of an agenda item. If anyone wishes to speak to an agenda item, please go to the information table to sign up. Remarks must be germane to the agenda, and we ask that you avoid references to personalities and character attacks, as those types of comments serve no productive purpose. As a reminder to the board and public, the board will not engage in discussion or deliberation with the speaker regarding comments made to agenda items. Discussion and deliberation will remain among the board members at the board table, with speakers' comments informing said discussion, deliberation, and determination as deemed necessary. We appreciate your input. Ms. Anderson, I believe that you have the consent motion this evening.
I move that the board approve the consent items in accordance with the recommended action for each item on the consent agenda, including bills previously authorized, certified, and approved for payment by the board secretary in the amount of $5,349,679.13.
May I have a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion from Anderson, a second from Ellsburn on our consent items. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, please vote. The consent items pass 7-0. The next item on our agenda is item number E1, open enrollment late applications for denial. I'll ask the superintendent to please introduce the matter.
As is the case with most meetings, we have continually throughout the year open enrollment applications, and then after the state mandated deadline, those applications become late applications. Typically those are denied, but in some special circumstances an appeal can be made, and a denial does not have to be made. In this case, we're recommending a denial for this one case.
Thank you. May I have a motion and a second to deny the open enrollment late application in accordance with state law and district policy?
So moved.
We have a motion from Ellsburn, a second from Langford. Any further discussion? Please vote. The motion to deny the late application has been approved. We will move to our next item, which is agenda item number F2, naming request at Jesse Franklin Taylor Education Center, Cassidy Building. Dr. Ahart, would you like to introduce the matter?
Yes, our friends from the Mondayman and Chautauqua neighborhood associations have, they've been actually fundamental in the development of the whole Jesse Franklin Taylor project, including the naming of the Jesse Franklin Taylor Educational Center. And they came to us, as you recall, I believe a month ago, about, with an idea for another naming recognition at that facility. And so we have Rhonda Cason and company here to after the review of the board naming committee, to actually have the board make a decision on that.
Great, thank you. And we did appoint a board naming committee. Barron, Anderson, and Langford, or the 3 members that were on the board naming committee. So I would entertain a motion and a second to approve the recommendation, and then we will go to our speakers. We have a motion from Anderson. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a second from Barron to approve the recommendation. We do have several individuals who wish to speak this evening, and we will start with Rhonda Cason.
Good evening. I'm Rhonda Cason, and I reside at 1819 Jefferson Avenue. And Superintendent Ahart, Chairman Johnson, the entire board, we want to thank you for helping us recognize what we call some of the hidden figures of our community. And Robert Hyde was certainly one of them. I knew him, and more importantly, my kids enjoyed being involved with him, and he was a kid's person. Sometimes we need to reach back and make others aware of what people have done for us, and that's why we are trying to name as much the facility after people that have been involved and been important in the roles of our community. I want them to know about Miss Tiffany and how she saved the preschool. I want them to know about the others that we have named and are recognizing. And so this is not the last. We'll be back. But we want to extend an invitation to each of you. We will be having a naming celebration on November 13th at 6 p.m. Don't worry, I'll send you an invitation. And I really would like the community, would like for you to come and enjoy this occasion with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Viola Perry.
Good evening. I'm Viola Perry. When Rhonda told me about the naming, I was extremely happy. I knew of Mr. Hyde as a very dignified man. If anyone knew about Mr. Hyde, when he walked into the room, he commanded attention. He was an educator, a wonderful person to deal with, and I found this out in this little story I'm going to tell you very quickly. My daughter, a little girl, attended the school where Mr. Hyde was principal. To say the least, she was a handful, for lack of better phrase, expression. And I remember I was very distraught about the whole situation and the kind of disciplinary action that this teacher wanted to give her. I spoke to Mr. Hyde about it. I was a little bit intimidated because of his commanding presence. And he looked at me, he said, "Don't worry about it." And he had a little smile, as if he knew that she was not what you call a real naughty kid. She was just a handful. She was creative. She always expressed herself. And when he smiled, and I saw that love and the fact that he did care, and he cared about all his students, but particularly my daughter, the man deserves the honor because of who he was and what he did and his love of education, and especially because he took care of my daughter. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Kitty Weston Nauer.
Good evening to our board members, superintendent. I got to know Mr. Hyde as a student at Drake, so we're going way back. And never did I know or did I realize that I would one day wind up in the building where he was a principal. He was the elementary principal at Cassidy, and I was the principal of Cassidy Alternative School. One of the things that I got to know about Mr. Hyde was that he was extremely passionate about education. He was extremely passionate about he himself having been a teacher. And he knew what it took to work with his staff and his community to help all students. He was also proud of the various leadership roles in the realm of education. I've already talked about his being a teacher, so that was as a classroom teacher. He was coordinator of Teacher Corps. I don't know if anyone knew that. That's back in the day of ways. And also as an administrator. You know, he wasn't your typical administrator. He loved kids. And one of the things that I found that I was able to do as principal at Cassidy was to open the doors to the little kids who were waiting on their buses in the morning, and worked with Iowa State Extension Services to provide after-school programming for those little kids when they got off of their buses in the afternoon. And I did that because I know that Mr. Hyde did all kinds of things in that community for those little ones. And even though my students were older, the least I could do was also watch out for the little ones who were there before, some of them were there before I got there 7 in the morning. And they had nowhere else to go in the afternoon until their parents got home. I support wholeheartedly the naming of the playground in Robert Hyde's honor. Those little kids are now adults, and they still remember having been at that school, not necessarily attending, but picking up their buses. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jackie Easley McGee.
Good evening, Board.
Good evening.
All right, I was told I might have to stall so we could wait for Mrs. Hyde. So I brought the Gettysburg Address, but I know you guys all know it, memorized it, so I won't read that. But no, actually, I'm here to offer my, on behalf of the Easley family, we join others in enthusiastic support of naming the Jesse Taylor Learning Center Playground in honor of Dr. Robert Hyde. My mother, Ruth Easley, was an educator at 2 of the schools that under Dr. Hyde's leadership. And although she's retired and resides in North Carolina today, she sends hearty affirmation of Dr. Hyde's wise counsel and his fair guidance as an administrator at both the schools where she was teaching. And yes, the Teacher Corps, we remember it very well. As a coordinator of the Teacher Corps, he influenced a generation of educators with his passion for the classroom. My mother also wants us to note, or wants me to note for the record, that he often had beautiful flowers in his office, which he brought personally every day, or a lot, from his garden. So thus, I think it's appropriate when the playground is dedicated that we hope that there will be a garden somewhere close by for all to enjoy and to smile and think of Dr. Robert Hyde.
Thank you. So those are all of our speakers for item F2. We have a motion and a second. Are there any board comments before we move to the board vote?
I'm always really inspired in a new way when you all come and bring forth a new name, because I think there's a generation of us who there's a lot of folks that we don't know in our community that have done really awesome things. And so every time you guys bring forth a name and we get to read a little bit about the figures who have paved the way, it's just inspiring, and it gives us a good reference point to move forward. So thank you all for continuing to bring these names and lift up these unsung heroes in our community. And it was a very easy decision to approve.
Other comments? So I don't know if Mrs. Hyde is going to be able to join us tonight. I'll stall just a little longer. But what people may or may not know is that not only was Dr. Hyde a teacher and principal in our district, but so was his lovely wife, Betty. And Betty had a long history with the district, and so together they actually made an indelible mark on many, many students. And I think Betty ended her career as a principal at Hoyt Middle School. A great legacy, a great family legacy, and I'm just proud that we're able to not only recognize Dr. Hyde, but in doing so also recognize the incredible work of Betty as well. So with that, we do have a motion and a second, so I will call for the vote. Motion passes unanimously 7-0, and we will be naming the playground at the Jesse Franklin Taylor Education Center for Dr. Robert Hyde, and we will be having an official dedication on November 13th. So we look forward to getting the invitation and joining you to recognize both Dr. Hyde and Betty that evening. So thank you for your work. We appreciate your efforts, and we know this isn't the last time, so we'll wait until the next time. How's that? Perfect. Thank you so much. The next item on our agenda is item number F3, Monitoring Report 2.2, Treatment of Parents, Owners, and Volunteers. And I'll turn it over
To me.
to,
I'm going to go down here.
okay,
So
Nate,
on the-
for the presentation. Oh, Tom's going to do the presentation? Okay, great. This is our annual monitoring report on this particular area of our board policies. So turn it over to Dr. Ahart.
Balance consideration. Oh, now my mic's on. This time, unfortunately, some of our HR leadership team is presenting at a national conference today, so they're unable to be here. So let me make sure I can operate our technology here. There we go. All right. So as it states in your report, there are 4 KPIs that we've been using for this monitoring report, and those are parent complaints, communication, community staffed committees, and volunteer survey. As the board may recall, volunteers were added to this policy very recently, as were owners, and so this has been last year, I believe, was the first year that the report was made under this version of the policy. And so the KPIs, at least two of the KPIs are very new, newly created, so we don't really have trend line data for those. Our first is parent complaints. These are complaints registered formally by parents around district issues, and as you see in your report, there's a more detailed table. Again, this is data that was not captured until we started this report 2 years ago, so there's only 2 years of data. The data is relatively unchanged. It's up a little bit in a couple of categories and down a little bit in another category. So relatively stable there. 11 total registered parent complaints, and as you see, they were all either unfounded or they were resolved resolved before an investigation was executed. The next one, a little challenging to put these into meaningful numbers because it's hard to measure communication. But I may ask Phil to come up here if you have particular questions about all of the data that we've shared regarding our communications. As you know, Phil and his team have won numerous awards from various organizations regarding our communications efforts. And something that we've continually, I think, evolved very effectively with is our chiefs work more and more directly with Phil and his team in being proactive and making sure that we're pushing out communications more strategically. So rather than just informing, which is a very important function that we've been doing well, I think, for a long time, really trying to be more targeted when particular issues arise that we want to make sure all of our stakeholders and parents are informed of. So Phil, do you want to highlight anything in the report? There's a
Sure. Yeah, I can. Just a couple of things I'll note. First of all, as you probably can imagine, and my comments just touch on what we do at a district-wide level, so it doesn't reflect, websites and social media and newsletters, all that good stuff that our schools do day in and day out on their own. Our website really is the hub of our communications efforts. As most of you know, we launched a new site at the end of June of this year. We've been averaging about 27,000 unique visitors to the website each typical school day, and about 1.4 million visitors during the course of the year 2016-2017. That's been pretty steady over the last couple of years. Since we launched the new site, we actually compared the first month of this school year with the first month of last school year, and our unique visits to the website that month were up 23%, which I think is a combination of, one, having a better website, but more importantly, some of the other tools we use are growing significantly with the mobile app, social media, and the like that direct people back to the website for information. Just note quick, too, one piece of the website, the blog, which if the website's the hub of our communications efforts, the blog is the heart and soul. We made 268 posts to the blog over the course of 2016-2017, so 1.5 times per school day. There's new content featuring, whether it's the programs or the people or the policies of the district. And that information in turn not only populates the website as well as our newsletter and our social media, but for those of you that subscribe to the local paper, even the media picks up a lot of it. I mean, we've been fortunate that the paper takes a lot of our material verbatim, even gives us photo credits and bylines in using that content. So it really has been a critical part of what we put out to the public and what serves as to populate a lot of our communications efforts. Maybe just note real quick too on the mobile app, if that's okay. Yeah. 3 years ago, we launched our mobile app, and a big part of the reason, well, one reason was everybody has an app, but the real reason was that the smartphone is the computer for many of our families, and so providing more information, literally in the palm of people's hands, is certainly the way we need to go. A lot of the information we originally launched on the app was kind of the day in, day out go-to information. It was breakfast and lunch menus, it was calendars, directories, that sort of thing. Prior to the start of this school year, we've integrated Infinite Campus in with the mobile app as well so that parents can log on and essentially do one-stop shopping now through the mobile app in terms of accessing Infinite Campus. And we were at around 17,000 and some mobile app downloads as of the end of last fiscal year, and we've seen almost a 25% increase in downloads just since that time over the last 3 months. So I think we're, the effort to reach more families and have that mobile platform accessible on their phones and used by them. With that integration of Infinite Campus, we've seen a pretty significant jump in that regard.
Also just mention on that line too is a more intentional effort when new families come to the Welcome Center to initially interface with the district. We're trying to do a more proactive job of introducing the app to them and helping them with any difficulties with downloading and so forth, and kind of walking them through the utility of it, so they're better equipped after their first interaction with us to stay connected and have easier access to the various resources in the district. All right.
I know there are more numbers in the presentation, but any questions on communications related items in the report?
All right. Thank you, Phil.
Thanks, Phil.
The next KPI is community staffed committees. By state code, there is really only one community staff committee required of school districts, and that's the School Improvement Advisory Committee. And this is another state code where it makes good basic sense when you consider the typical school district in Iowa. In a district of our size, it doesn't necessarily play out the same way that it does in a much smaller school district. And so this district, well before my time, has been really good about engaging with community on various sort of ongoing big ticket items. So some of those examples of some of those, in addition to the School Improvement Advisory Committee, are the Superintendent's Facilities Advisory Committee, which is about 12 members, but it varies in size. And when it gets more active, so for instance, we're in year 3 of a 5-year plan. Later this year, we'll be convening that committee again and talking about where we are relative to the original 5-year plan that they brought forward to the board 2.5 years ago, and then beginning the initial stages of creating the next 5-year plan. So we're in kind of the low tide with that committee, but as Bill Good always says, we're not going to meet just to meet, and he respects the valuable time of our community members who participate in that committee. Membership on that committee changes a little bit year over year, but there's always a core group of folks who are really familiar with the district, understand kind of the trajectory, especially since we've had the local option sales tax and now the statewide penny, and have a really good picture of how we've invested our dollars throughout the district, and do a really nice job of lifting up needs from every corner of the district. We have the audit committee, which the board may be more familiar with because we always have a board member attending those meetings. And if you've been on that committee, you understand the great expertise that our community members bring to the district. Brett Zeller, our internal auditor, chairs those meetings, and they don't just focus on finance. That's obviously the number one priority, but they look at a number of risk mitigation issues, including cybersecurity. And that's a small but mighty group that has seen a little bit more than typical turnover over the last 2 years, simply because some of our community members have transferred to jobs outside of the district. But so far we've been successful in continuing to recruit really high quality people who have the expertise that we really need for that committee to add value to the district. The Citizens Budget Advisory Committee was disbanded last year, and I included this in here just because that's a change from prior years. This committee was created a number of years ago when the district was in a particularly challenging financial straits, and the committee was created to help bring more community input to what were some very challenging and difficult decisions regarding bringing the budget in line with unanticipated extremely low revenues. As this board and this administration have worked more hand in hand in sharing, being more transparent, I guess you would say, about what the district priorities are and how we go about building the budget to reflect the board's priorities, there became the need for that committee became less clear, and it became a little bit of a little more frustrating, and the original purpose of the committee didn't really exist anymore. And so we were sort of looking for a purpose. So we decided, let's disband that, at least for the time being, and we can always, that's something that we can resurrect if we feel that there is a need. And then the Equity Advisory Committee was started, as it states in your report, a couple of years ago. Has about 25 community members, and I believe 6 are district employees. I may have to, let me scroll to that portion of my report. Oh, I guess we're calling the 6 the community members that don't have any other association with the district. But the total membership is about 25. That group met twice over the last fiscal year, and we had some stumbling with that committee and internal communications relative to that committee, and in looking at what the intended function of the School Improvement Advisory Committee is and the challenges that we're trying to address with that committee, and looking at what work the Equity Committee was designed to do. We will be folding those 2 groups in together. It'll elevate the purpose of both groups, and instead of having 2 separate conversations that both revolve greatly around equity, we thought it made sense to tie those 2 groups together and have a more robust conversation that sort of widens the scope of both groups and involves a greater number of our community members in those discussions. So we anticipate launching that new version of School Improvement and Equity this fall. The volunteer survey, our first attempt at this report really had almost no data because we weren't capturing any around volunteers, and so a survey was created in 2016, and it was given in the fall. So the results that you see in your report are comparing a fall first go at the survey with spring, the second year of the survey. You'll see relatively flat scores, although the scores are a little bit, the responses are a little bit lower in this past go-around. We think the 2 main reasons for that are the first attempt at the survey. A lot of the people taking that survey, we assume, were first-time volunteers and had very little experience as a volunteer to reflect on when they were completing the survey. So we do think that spring is the better time to give it, because we're capturing most of the volunteers who have had a year's experience in whatever role they're trying to play as a volunteer in the district. But again, we struggle with getting a response rate that we would like. But it is good data to have, but we do need to work at finding a way to get more responsiveness from our 1,400 plus volunteers. And that is all for the 2.2 report. Are there questions, comments, or discussion on that before we move on to 2.3?
Board questions for Dr. Ahart on 2.2? Yes.
When you mentioned that it's a relatively small number of volunteers that are taking the survey, is that noted here? I'm missing it, I think, if it is.
Yeah, I believe we have the response rate listed. Let me.
Like 1,400 took it, and 193 responded. 1,423 volunteers
was distributed to 1,400, and
193
yeah, we have a
responded.
percentage, I think, listed there.
Okay.
Let me find that.
Okay. So when we're thinking about like the 5.1% that would recommend, that would disagree with recommending to friends or family to volunteer, or the 3.6 that said that they don't necessarily feel welcomed and appreciated by staff. I know when I had asked this question, Anna had said that there was no way to follow up because these were anonymous, but that just seems like we don't want these people walking away with that impression of our schools. And so I guess my question would be, is there something that could be done to have people potentially leave contact if they wanted to, so that we do have some follow-up? Because I think this could be a missed opportunity. These volunteers could have a lot to bring, and they just might not be returning in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point. And I'll make sure that we have an opportunity to give detail behind that, even if they could still remain anonymous and give us meaningful feedback. Yeah, that's a great point and duly noted.
Yes, Ms. Langford.
I brought this up in our email communication before, but I'm just wondering in terms of treatment of our parents and our volunteers and owners. I'm just wondering if, and this is more a question towards the board, if we feel that these KPIs, and clearly you too, Tom, because we do it in partnership, you all do that. But if these are the best KPIs to measure the treatment of our parents and owners, I'm just not, the distribution of the employee handbook doesn't necessarily tell us a ton, I think, about how folks are being treated or how they feel they're being treated. I'm not necessarily sure the listing of our committees, while it's good to know that we have them, gives us a lot of insight into how folks are being treated or feel they're being treated. And I think, I saw mention of the school times kind of being the biggest issue that affects parents, but I don't think we're necessarily cued into if there are other issues that are affecting parents or volunteers, because we're not necessarily looped into the feedback loop. So if parents were feeling, if there was an issue, we wouldn't necessarily know about it in terms of how people interact with their schools or if they feel welcome there.
Well, we do have some data in the treatment of students report that gets more directly to interactions with schools. I'm not saying it's answering because I feel the need to have better KPIs too. I struggle with what those might be, but there is in regard, and maybe it's misplaced there, but the parent complaints relative to particular school buildings and concerns with students in particular really is reflected in the treatment of students report.
Okay.
And so we haven't used that same data here because we to try to not muddy the waters. But I certainly hear what you're saying, and I'm certainly open to a discussion about what indicators might be better for us to capture.
So I would just remind us that we are going to have a KPI review. We agreed that every 3 years we're going to review all of our KPIs. So I would definitely encourage that you put some thought into other things that you think might be better indicators, but that likely will happen hopefully by the end of the calendar year. That's the plan at this point. So
absolutely, yeah. And I think when we've intentionally put specific resources into outreach, we've seen some really great results, like in terms of how our social media is being used and our website, in terms of the response that we got for school time. So if there was something that we specifically wanted to know, I'm really confident that the district could allocate what we need to do to get the feedback that we want. So I think I really like even though the response rates on that volunteer survey are low, it felt like it was getting more at what we were looking for potentially, so. My thoughts.
Oh, I would also note on that, well, the other thing that I want to note, and I should have probably put an addendum on here. 2 years ago, the state of Iowa said they were going to do a parent survey for all schools. And at the same time, I was talking to the board about using the Gallup, the newly developed Gallup survey, which is not an insignificant investment, but I think a valid investment. And we were waiting for the state to release theirs because we didn't want to duplicate effort and send out something because it's difficult to get as high a response rate as we would like, right? So we didn't want to send out Gallup and then a month later send out something that's essentially trying to get at the same thing, but is the state's tool that the state would require. Well, then at the 11th hour, the state said, well, we're going to hold off for a year. And then they were going to do it the next year, and then they made the decision to not do it again. So there was another data element that we had intended to include and did not make that investment with Gallup in deference to the state, but sort of like the state assessment, they haven't quite followed through with that as they indicated they were going to. So certainly worth a revisit. Yeah.
Anything else?
Yep, absolutely.
Other questions for the superintendent on this monitoring report? Yes.
Oh, no, I
Ellsworth.
was just moving my
Oh,
hand
okay.
away from my
That's
screen.
all right.
Sorry.
Anyone else?
Just real quick, because I actually was thinking something very similar, so I just wanted to echo that. And I know, we had some email communications, and you were able to answer some of my questions as well as looking at the KPIs that we had planned on doing. But and we worked together, and you had pointed out, we did ask for some of this information in this report. So that is a very valid point, that we did request that to be in here. So I want to point that out as well, since you weren't here. And just as a quick reminder, I don't know if you guys saw that in the response, but I definitely think there's, teasing this out word by word, we can probably come to something better. Because I feel like a lot of this was one-way messaging, I guess. But I look forward to working on some new ones.
Yeah, and and you're right, it is. And if we need to develop some way to capture the two-way, which is extremely difficult to do, we're very open to that.
Any other comments? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion and a second to approve the monitoring report on the treatment of parents, owners, and volunteers. A motion from Anderson.
Second.
Second from De La Gardelle Shelley. Any additional discussion? Hearing none, please vote. Motion passes 7-0. The next item on our agenda is item number F4, Monitoring Report 2.3, Treatment of Employees. I'll turn it over to the superintendent.
Okay, and we'll wait for a moment for Kyle to get our presentation to appear. Here we go. Okay, monitoring report 2.3, which is treatment of employees, which again has been modified a little bit over the last couple of years. The KPIs we're sharing, and again, this is, I think this is another area where we're ripe for a discussion about what the board really desires to have for monitoring data. But what we have before you now are data on employee complaints. That's, again, that was a new KPI in the last 2 years. Our acceptable use policy agreement, employee handbook distribution and approval, some information on the district equity committee, cultural proficiency training, and teacher development programs. And we will share a short video toward the end of the presentation. There we go. So employee complaints, this is a system very similar to the parent complaint data. We have relatively flat. Total complaints is down by 11, which is a pretty significant decrease, but there wasn't a big number last year. As you can see, all of the cases were either unfounded or resolved prior to a full conclusion of a investigation. You probably all saw this statement tonight when you logged into, I think it shows up on yours, and that you're not technically employees. Does it show up on? Yeah. Oh, so you don't have to comply. Good for you. So we
well, we do, but
we do. But
you just don't have to.
You just don't have to click
on
the
it.
extra step. So this is just to acknowledge that that employees understand that there is an employee handbook, and that they're responsible for its contents. They know where to find it, and so forth. So pretty generic pro forma type stuff. Employee handbook, a new practice in the district over the last 3 years is every year when we issue the handbook, anything that has changed from the prior year is highlighted in the online and the printed version, both in the table of contents and in the actual content in the document, so that folks don't have to go through and looking for what's different from the year before, but can go directly to where the changes are. Supervisors, if we do keep track of who's acknowledged the handbook. Some folks don't immediately, and so supervisors all get a list of folks who have not actively acknowledged the handbook, and they're followed up with after that report is given. And then we do produce paper copies in various languages. Supervisors can tell us in what languages they need to have the handbook available. And that's especially true for our custodial department. We have a number of variety of languages spoken, and so we produce that document in whatever languages are required so that employees have a fair shot of actually understanding its content. My computer's a little clunky here. Here we go. Every year, the superintendent is required to have our handbook reviewed by legal counsel and give their seal of approval. And this is just a screenshot of the email affirmation. I guess it's a written affirmation from Jim Hanks from Allers and Cooney, one of our two primary contacts there at Allers. Equity and cultural proficiency. Although this is not all-inclusive of what we're doing in terms of professional development, this is what we can certify happened last year in those various employee groups in terms of hours of training. We do have the gift of having, as part of our ongoing effort to get more value out of our relationship with Heartland AA 11, once we got introduced to Jilmara Mitchell a couple of years ago, we negotiated that her contract is served in DMPS, so she has an office at 2100 Floor, and she's, though paid by Heartland AEA, she's a full-time team member of DMPS, and is really the leader in these initiatives she works directly with Office of Academics and Office of Schools in sort of guiding what the content, when the trainings happen, and so forth. And then as you are all aware, we have a challenge with having a workforce that reflects the students that we serve and the families that we serve, and that's an ongoing effort. You've seen the data that's been shared from the Iowa Department of Education showing the scarcity of minority teaching candidates and administrator candidates in the state, and to a little bit of a lesser degree, but not much of a lesser degree, nationwide. And so if we really want to turn the worm on getting these numbers righted, we really need to make a concerted effort to grow our own. And so we have our Dream to Teach program that I know most all of you are familiar with. Although it's really not pertinent to this report, we did add a position this year. So we do have, as part of our YPAR, you'll learn about that in our next monitoring report because this is for last year. But we actually have added a full-time FTE that is working full-time instructionally and on the Dream to Teach program on efforts directly related to equity as it relates to our workforce, but also our students. Our student work. So although we have a number of students in this program now, we're making a more concerted effort to have this more systematic, and then the next step in that will be formalizing concrete agreements with institutions of higher education so that we're garnering clearer pathways for students and attracting more scholarship dollars so that we can have more tangible support for these students once they leave our care within the walls of DMPS. We continue to have our 3D program. The 3Ds are DMAC, Drake, and DMPS, and the effort here is to identify minority employees mostly within DMPS, although we have had a couple from DMAC as well who have a desire to become a teacher, and then putting together unique strategic support for those individuals to bridge the hurdles that are in their way to complete college and their teaching degree and become a full-fledged teacher. And so we meet regularly with DMAC and Drake, and really we take each of these cases on a case-by-case basis, and each of us brings resources to the table to smooth the way and make it possible for some of these folks who aspire to become a teacher to actually be able to complete a program and become a teacher. And we actually have our first 3D graduate hired and teaching in Des Moines this year. And then our blue contract, which was formerly known as the alternative teacher contract, we have, I think in your report it says 268. The real number is 269 teachers in that program. So that program's been alive now for 5 years. We're averaging just over 50 teachers per year in that program. You will be invited later this fall in December actually, to an event where our first master's degree Blue contract teachers will be graduating from Drake with their master's degree. We're really excited about that. We continue to work very closely with Drake on the Blue contract. The response rate from the responses of our teachers in the Blue program have continued to be very positive, but particularly so for their experience in the master's program. By all reports, it's very rigorous, and we have some data that I believe I shared with the board a couple of weeks ago in a memo, where one of our staff members who's just completed his doctorate at Drake was able to compare our Blue contract teachers with about 800 other teachers from around the state in regards to cultural proficiency. And we need to replicate that study, and we're hoping to find somebody to do that, but there was a hugely significant difference in the cultural readiness and proficiency of the teachers in the Blue contract, then regardless of where they were in the contract, compared with both their urban peers and their peers in rural and suburban districts from around the state. The Blue contract will be increasingly important, I believe, as teachers become more and more a shortage profession. People say that special education teachers are a shortage area and that the hard sciences and math are shortage areas. Our numbers would tell us that, except with the possible exception of elementary teachers, virtually every teaching certification area is a shortage area. And the Blue contract was originally designed not only to attract but to retain the best teacher talent. We have very good evidence that that is indeed happening, and we're going to have to capitalize even more on publicizing this opportunity for teaching candidates, because it's a great deal for the teachers and it's a great deal for our students, and it really does help stabilize our workforce, because the turnover rate with our new teachers, both Blue and non-Blue, has dropped precipitously since we've had the Blue contract in place. And with that, I think we're ready. Kyle, if you can play the video. It's a short video on the Blue contract.
The Blue contract really was made possible by the partnership between Des Moines Public Schools and Drake University. Des Moines Public Schools administrators and teachers collaborated with Drake instructors to really build the master's program for the Des Moines Public School District. It focuses on culturally responsive instruction and leadership, and there are also several endorsement tracks that teachers can take within their master's program at Drake University.
The Blue programs impacted my teaching and learning by collaborating with others and implementing best practices that we've been taught in our professional developments and master's courses.
The Blue program has revolutionized my teaching in so many ways, because I not only think about the strengths my students are coming in to my classroom with, but then also their social identities and how those affect their learning.
I think the Blue program has helped me become a more reflective teacher and has really encouraged me to continue thinking about my practices every day.
I just think I'm a more prepared teacher than what I would have been without the Blue program. I just was more prepared, able to collaborate when I had issues. There was somebody I could go to that I knew I was going to get answers from right away, and they were going to help me out, so it was really good. And I'm coming out of it with a master's degree, free master's degree, so that's a pretty good advantage as well.
The biggest advantage for me has been the master's classes, especially cultural proficiency.
And the program is really geared toward our environment in Des Moines and our students, and it's incredibly impactful when you're able to bring that learning back into the classroom.
As a beginning teacher, it's very overwhelming and stressful. This program helped alleviate the everyday stresses and pressures as a first-year teacher.
So we have huge supports in evaluation, but then also in content we're given, ideas to grow.
Ask us how things were going, if we needed anything, as small as getting the supplies that we needed to be an effective first-year teacher, to classroom management techniques, and to connecting and building a network of other teachers for support.
Now I have friends all over the district. I go to places, I know people there. It's not like I'm walking into somewhere and clueless to who they are, so it's been good to be a part of it.
Absolutely do it. It's the best thing you can do for yourself as a beginning teacher?
It's a no-brainer. It provides you support, it provides you time to collaborate and implement strategies to be an effective teacher.
It really does help you work with our students and our population.
There's nothing better, especially in Des Moines Public Schools, with a district that's this big. Get the supports and the assistance to teach the best you can, because I feel that I'm teaching my best way right now, and it's really getting through with my students, and they're learning a lot, and we're both growing together, and I would not be the teacher I am today without the Blue contract.
So it not only supports you, but it supports your students, and it makes you the best that you can possibly be.
I think if you want to be at a district that's doing all the cutting edge things in a progressive way, Des Moines is the place to be. And you get a master's degree in continued education, and leadership roles are going to be more possible through the Blue contract too. So
the support as a first-year teacher is outstanding, and I think that's why I will always stay with Des Moines Public Schools.
One note I will add too, the legislature is cutting dramatically the funding for mentoring program, the required mentoring program that's been in place for quite a number of years. And so we're in good stead because we already have this in place that is not reliant on those dollars. So we're going to take a hit from that like every other district, but we have a very robust, essentially mentoring program through the Blue contract that we can capitalize on to help bridge that gap with the other program that's going away because of state funding. So that concludes the treatment of staff report.
Questions for the superintendent? Yes, Ms. Langford.
My apologies. I realized that I was commenting, some of the comments I made for the last report were intended for this report, and I was getting confused looking at my notes, so I apologize. Although I do think that there are some places we could tighten up our communication with, or maybe get some different feedback from our parents. My comments are specifically targeted towards the treatment of our staff and wondering if we have the right KPIs to get the necessary feedback. Because honestly, I don't, and this is just my personal opinion, again, this is bringing it back to my colleagues. Sorry, I'm pulling up my notes. I don't believe we're getting the necessary information that we need through the current KPIs to determine whether our staff, how they're being treated, and the perception about how they feel they're being treated within the district. And yeah, I'm just gonna highlight, while I think some of this information is good, I don't think the handbook, just mentioning that we have that, tells us really anything about how our staff are being treated. I don't think listing the cultural, the equity committee is helpful. It's good to know that, I think at this point the board is also familiar with the Dream to Teach program and the Blue Alternative contract, and we're very proud of those things. I do think it would be helpful, and whether this report is the best report or not, to actually get some data now about where we're at and the 3D program in terms of enrollment, in terms of where those teachers are at and where they're faring in our district. So that's one general thing. I look forward to revisiting that conversation when we look at our KPIs in the fall. And I know
I did list the number of people involved in each of those programs in the report.
It's in the written
Yeah.
report.
It's in the report.
I apologize.
If we need more, we can certainly look into what
I
other.
think sometimes we focus on the PowerPoint and don't go to the written
Report,
report.
yeah,
Correct.
and I know it's been a little while, so then I apologize for that.
Oh, no, that's fine.
So thank you for providing that. I also remember the last year that we looked at this report, we talked about, I think you all mentioned that staff were given a survey.
The
Board
Gallup
members,
survey?
Am I not remembering that correctly? I thought our HR and came and spoke about a survey that was
Gallup
given.
poll? You mean?
The Gallup.
The Gallup Q12.
Is there a reason, I know it's been included in the past, why that wasn't necessarily included in this report?
Yeah, because we, after that discussion, we determined that the questions that we pulled from that didn't match
What we were looking
what was
for.
being asked for in the, yeah.
So did we come up with another survey?
No,
At this point, we haven't.
no.
So as we're talking about maybe implementing or finding a new survey. I just want to lift up again, I remember we had this conversation looking at the differences between our certified staff and our classified staff, and also having that data disaggregated, looking at ethnic and racial background. I think those are things that are really important that we need to be looking at, especially when we're having the conversation around recruiting staff of color to the district.
Yeah.
Looking at how they feel like they're faring in the district, I think would be something of
And
note.
we can provide that Gallup data. We still give that, and we can break it down. I believe we have the Q12. I know the student poll we're breaking down. We asked Gallup specifically to break it down that way. I can't recall on the Q12, but I'll check. But we have that data, so we can share that even if it's not part of this report, because our interpretation from the last time we shared it under this report was that it wasn't really responsive to what the requirements of the policy called for.
Sure.
But we can still certainly share it with the board if that's of interest.
Sure, well, I think we have not updated that policy. We think we've updated that policy now to kind of include.
Which policy? Treatment of
staff. We've included, treatment of
employees,
students, treatment of staff, to include certain words that would broaden and include some of the information that we had mentioned looking for, particularly in terms of how our students and staff are treated in our policies. We can revisit that. I guess this is the tension for me. I know that we had a really solid retreat with Eric when he came into town, and we talked about the importance of stewarding as board members the feedback that we hear from the community, and also balancing that with the fact that it's not necessarily always representative sample.
Right.
Right? So we may be hearing tensions or frustrations from staff within our community, but it may not necessarily be a representative sample of everyone within our district. So I want to elevate, then how do we get the representative sample
Gotcha.
of
I hear you.
feedback from people within our district? So if there are places that we could do better, then we can be informed, and then we can tackle that as a body.
Yeah, and I do have it's a follow-up with AJ, me and most of my team on Friday afternoon. So I'll make sure that we don't skip over that particular question.
Okay. Because we're going to do I think our job as board members to recognize that everything that we're hearing necessarily is not always fully representative. We're still going to be in the communities, but then how do we get that information that we need here?
Right.
I just really want to emphasize that, and that's just my opinion as an individual board member.
Yeah, I hear that.
Other questions from board members? Ms. Ellsburn.
I guess just kind of more of a comment. As we are developing and revisiting KPIs, what we also need to remember is that the data that we're shown is to show compliance to the policy and the interpretation, and the policy. And so while we might want different things, we do say that you can't go without a handbook. You can't go without having an appeals process, without acquainting staff with the policy. So everything that they've provided does show that that construct is there. Not in disagreement that we shouldn't have something more and deeper, but just kind of in the sense that those are showing compliance, which is what we're asking for.
Other comments? Yes, Ms. De La Gardelle Shelley.
Okay. It's really great to hear that, there's one additional FTE for the Dream to Teach program and to look at equity. And when we're looking at the number of students who participated, it looks like we have representation from 5 middle schools and 1 high school. Can you elaborate on, is it because those buildings are being targeted for specific reasons in there? I'm just curious because I look at that.
It's because that's where we were able to recruit teacher mentors.
Okay.
So we're trying to expand that, but
that's kind of what I was thinking. But
this is one of those things where, most of our programs are like this. You don't just want to say, okay,
anybody just
Kirsten,
jump in.
you be this, and if you don't have a passion for that and a genuine interest in cultivating these students, then it's probably not going to be the kind of program we want. So we're intentionally building capacity so that we have somebody in each of our middles and highs to serve as that mentor.
Okay.
Yeah, but that's a great question.
Yeah.
But there wasn't particular strategy behind where they were. It was just where we were able to recruit somebody who could really tie into that mission and take it by the horns.
And this can be offline too, but I would love to, if there's a way that we're getting feedback from those teachers of how that's going, of, the success of that program, because I think it is so important to cultivate our own, to keep them here, to keep them home. So,
yeah. We can certainly do that.
When we look at and we talk about the cultural competency training for our staff, for our teachers and our instructional staff, but also, staff all across the district, when we look at, I know that the information that we asked in this report is what you provided, and we talk about the hours of training, but I'm just curious, are there measures or formatives that are built into that training where our staff are measuring their own growth? Are they setting goals for their growth? Like, what is this is to provide me some context when we think about KPIs. What is the measure for how we're measuring the growth there, or that training or that learning is happening?
We don't have a good measure for that and I'll just, with this one caveat, a number of us have taken the IDI, which is a really valid tool to measure one's own cultural proficiency, and then get coaching to move yourself along that continuum. And we're actively working on this now. What we don't have is enough people who are qualified to actually do that coaching. So we're trying to get key people in the district to take that, use that instrument and it's very comprehensive.
Yeah.
And it's an eye opener to take it. I've done it. Get a real picture of where you are, and then work with somebody who can help you make a plan to do, to move along that spectrum. We've inquired with a couple of different places that actually have folks to do that. One as close as Fairfield, of all places. Most of the others all the others that we found were out of state, but it's cost prohibitive to do that. So we're in the process now of building capacity within the district. Okay. And the other piece to that, just as a logistical issue, is you need to have the right organizational relationship between the coach and the, we don't want all the principals to do it and then be the coach for their teachers, for instance. So we have that need to measure, and we think that's the way to do it. Okay. We're actively building capacity to do that.
Okay.
That'll be a little bit of a longer term.
Yeah, because I know, we have, as a board, we've spent some time talking about, making sure that we're not just getting one-off feedback. But
I need to correct that.
No, that's okay.
We do have one other thing. So the Gallup, the Q12 poll that we
Okay.
give, which, as the name suggests, is 12 items, we have the ability to add questions to that. So we do have an item that we've done for 2 years now, asking specifically about, actually, I think it's 2 questions, asking our employees specifically about the experience they've had with their training, and to reflect on how it's impacted them.
Okay.
But I failed to include it here.
Yeah.
But we do have that one measure.
Okay. Because I know we want to kind of reduce the amount of emphasis that we place on kind of one-off comments from staff. But when I frequently hear staff, if I hear them talking about this, it's usually, it doesn't sound to me that they feel like it's for their growth, but it's more, if they're not doing it, it's something that makes them uncomfortable. They feel like maybe they're not doing what they should be doing. They feel like it could potentially be punitive. And I think what we want to make sure is that our staff are all feeling as if they're growing, particularly in this area, because it's so important for creating the relationships they need with their students to be successful.
I agree.
So I just wanted to think about, what are we doing as far as continuing to encourage our teachers to grow, so.
Right.
Other board comments, questions? Natasha Newcomb.
Thank you. Sorry, just want to confirm for, I don't know what slide it is, for the page 3 of the document that we received. For the data collected, it says at the bottom, it's July 1st, 2016 through June 30th of 2017. Is that the same dates for 2015 through 2016 as well then?
Sorry.
I'm sorry, on which page?
It's right above the acceptable use policy. That box directly above that. I'm just confirming that it's the same time period.
July 1, 2015 to July 30th, 2016, as compared to July 1, 2016.
Yeah, July 1
17.
through June 30 of
So it would be the same?
And yeah, it's the same time, yeah.
Okay, just wanted to make sure of that. Then just kind of what Deanna kind of was saying earlier, I actually I agree with what was already said previously with the other report, but particularly when it comes to like identifying major issues and those resources and the KPIs. Again, with this item as well, we've got, it's challenging. It is definitely kind of a challenging and moving target. So do appreciate the effort put into it and look forward to seeing how it grows and develops.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to our next refresh of the KPI discussion.
Definitely curious to get more deeper into the Dream to Teach, our 3D and the Blue contracts, getting more data pulled out from that as we are able to obtain more.
Other board comments, questions?
I apologize. I just have one more clarifying question. When we're talking about the preferred language for the handbook, is there a place within intake or within personnel files where staff are indicating a preferred language for communication?
I don't know.
Okay.
I'll have to get back to you on that.
Okay, because what my question was if there is, can that just trigger something automatic where these type of specific communications are going out in those home languages? Because I think we want to send a message that all of staff are valued, and if those are their preferences, that we're honoring those and making this as easy as possible for them. Right. So
very good idea.
Other questions or comments from board? Mr. Barron.
A couple quick things. On the hours of cultural proficiency training, 6 hours here, 9 hours, 12, 20, 2 hours for the superintendent's staff. Is that accurate? So 2 hours of training that you've had on cultural proficiency training in the last
No, that's
year?
that's actually for the support staff in the superintendent's office. So like,
okay.
That was really focused on more of a customer service aspect, the folks that interact most directly with the public. Yeah.
Okay.
And is a continuing effort.
Absolutely. So it's moving down to the teacher development programs. I think it'd be interesting in supplemental information that we get in a future memo to see if what the racial and ethnic breakdown is of our Dream to Teach participants.
Okay.
And then additionally, I know Dream to Teach is not you move through that experience, and a lot of those kids move into the teacher academy, and I think that's another part of the story to tell in terms of the teacher development work that we do here in the district, because those are 10th, 11th, 12th graders that are in classrooms by the time that they're done and making a decision about whether they want to be educators. And it's a part that in the political dialogue gets lost on our end because we don't talk about it enough, but it's really an important investment that you all are making along these lines, and something that the district or that the board is putting a high value on. So I think it's something for us to remember to include in that story that we're telling.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Any further board questions? Yes. Ms. Langford.
Thank you, Cindy, for calling to question the policy. So I can say now, in looking at that, I get what we're saying. We do have it in our policy where, like, the superintendent, they must provide a manual. So I totally get why that's in the report. What my point is that we changed our language. We worked to update the overall broad policy that those underlying points come from. So with respect to the treatment of employees, the superintendent shall not cause or allow conditions that are unsafe, unfair, inequitable, or undignified. I guess my call is, or my comment is, as a board, working with the district, how do we find some sort of measurement that addresses more of those questions? And then also as a board, because we govern from two levels, right? We do the work, the official governing work, and then we also have our work with the community. And we talk about the two roles often in terms of how we do that. This may be a question for us to further explore in our linkage committee, how we can make sure that we're also getting different loops of feedback from our staff and employees. That was my point, in the sense of, so from a governing perspective, how can we get information in our reports that gets at those things, and part two, how do we as a board
I would
on
offer,
that task?
I hear what you're saying, and I know that this doesn't satisfy, but I would say that the employee complaints that we're now tracking does get to the vast majority of that. Maybe not in the detail that you want. I understand that, but there is, data responsive to what the policy states.
Sure, I hear that. One feedback for sure. One piece of feedback. I do think it could be expanded.
For sure, and we're also trying to limit our KPIs to 3 to 5 per monitoring report, and so we do
We'll have to
come
have some
against
conversations.
what are the right ones. But I absolutely agree. We can revisit these and find stuff that's more on point to what the board would like to understand better.
Ms. Anderson?
Sorry, how does a staff member go about like complaining or filing a complaint?
They go to our HR website, or actually they go to, if you go on our website and you go to the staff, there's tabs across the staff. There's a parent tab, a board tab, so forth. There's a staff tab, and then there's a link where you can file a complaint, and you can do that electronically. You can do it in person as well, but most submit it electronically.
Do you think the staff feels safe in doing that? Or do you have any feedback? I don't know, I guess. I don't know if that's the best system, but I don't know what other system there could be.
Yeah, I don't know. I know that we actually have a articulated formal system that we didn't used to have.
Okay, it's better than.
In an effort to make people feel safe, and that it
Good.
is an expectation if you're not finding, if you're finding something that you don't feel that's uncomfortable or you feel is wrong, and you're unable to resolve it, that you have an avenue to find resolution. We certainly would be open to other ways. I'm not sure what that would be, but we always want to get better.
Is it communicated to staff that that's available to them? Or I mean, I realize it's right on the website, but is that something, it's not like something you want to probably promote, but.
Well, no, I think it's something that we want everyone to be aware of.
Okay,
for
so
sure.
are they made aware
they
of
get,
that?
They
or?
get all of our staff get a review at the beginning of the year of standard policies and procedures. So they get notified at least once a year that they have that avenue. And then typically, though, what happens is, I shouldn't say typically, most of the ones that I'm familiar with, they'll go to a peer or a supervisor explaining, that they have this situation, and they'll be reminded, you can go right here and submit a complaint.
So that's like the protocol is to probably go to peer supervisor and then do that, or they can just
do it.
that,
They can do
right?
it whenever they want.
Right, okay.
They don't have to talk to anybody about it in advance.
Okay. So I guess, like earlier you said, there was a way to track if people were participating in, sorry, I forget exactly what, but you said there was a way to track if people were, the handbook, if people were signing in or, reading it. You're not monitoring what staff, or I don't know, I guess, is it?
Yeah, every employee has a unique sign-in,
Mm-hmm.
so we know who's signed in and acknowledged and made that acknowledgement, and we also know who has not. And so with a small number that haven't acknowledged electronically, then they're asked to do so on paper by the supervisor.
So when they're making a complaint, you're going to know it's from a certain teacher. It's not anonymous.
No.
Is that
It's not anonymous because there's absolutely no way to follow up on a complaint if we don't know who it is.
Okay, so you're going to know. Okay, I get it.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Yep.
Any additional board questions? So a couple of things that I heard, obviously a review of the KPIs is really important. And I think, again, trying to figure out how we identify and develop KPIs that go across all employee groups so that we're not just isolating the information we're getting on one, but we're able to really reflect how whatever that KPI is can be reflected across everyone, so we're getting really good data on all of the populations that are served in the district. This is definitely teacher heavy, and I understand why.
Well, the teacher development programs is
Right.
clearly specific to teachers, but I believe all the others go across all employee groups.
Right. I think my point was
Yep.
trying to make sure that as we are thinking in advance about what KPIs look like, how we begin to think much more universally about how we sort of get to those 3 or 4 key things that can be stretched across everyone so that we're able to really do that deep dive.
Got it.
Okay. Any additional comments or questions? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion and a second to approve the monitoring report on treatment of employees, 2.3. We have a motion from Barron and a second from De La Gardelle Shelley. Any additional comments? Please vote. Motion carries 7-0. Thank you. The next item on our agenda is item number F5, DMPS ELL Bilingual Family Liaison and the Center for New Americans. And I'll ask the superintendent to please introduce the matter while our presenters come forward.
Yes, so I want to thank Pablo Ortega, who is now well into his second year of tenure with the district, our director of ELL programs, and you all know the legendary Vin Nguyen. They have really partnered amazingly well, and I'm really excited about where we're headed with, I want to say ELL services, but what we're doing for families in addition to our actual bona fide students is really exciting, and I think something that our board should be extremely proud of. We've made some changes, as you all know, in some new programming and restructuring some existing programming to, as we're always doing, taking a look at what our limited resources are and how we can best leverage those to effectively serve our families. So with that, I'll turn it over to Pablo and Ben. Thanks for being here, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'll just go ahead and get started with the presentation that we've forwarded on to the board. Thanks again for having us here. As we started out about a year ago, trying to determine what was the best path forward for increasing achievement amongst our ELL students, the central office staff, ELL, wanted to hear from the voices at the school, wanted to hear from the voices of central office folks in terms of how to move forward. We've given you guys an excerpt of some of our long-term strategic plan. On the one side, you'll notice that teacher recruitment and development, specifically for ELL endorsed teachers, is one of our higher priorities. We wanted to increase the amount of teachers that were dedicated specifically to ELL students. We wanted to make sure that we had a plan to move forward so that all staff, not only ELL endorsed staff members, but all staff were better prepared to serve ELL students. We wanted to ensure that because of the influx of older students that we were seeing coming into the district, that our secondary staff was better prepared to teach those foundational reading skills, which typically are not something that secondary teachers focus on, and we wanted to make sure that they were prepared to deliver on that. We wanted to make sure that all staff was better prepared to be able to provide service for students who have recently arrived into the U.S. And then a second piece of our strategy was to also increase our community outreach, to be more robust about how we went about serving communities of language minorities within the district. And so this is how we have moved forward in terms of delivering on those two strategies.
Okay. So the second strategy is we newly established the Center for New Americans. It is located on 6th floor, 901 Walnut Street at Walnut Street School. It is in operation right now. We are providing services at this point. So.
Thanks. So one of the things that we were looking at in terms of how do we provide better service to our language minorities was increasing the responsibility of a role that we once had in the district called Bilingual Community Outreach Worker, BCOs as we used to call them. We wanted to increase their responsibility at the school sites. And so we changed the job description to give it more, just a higher level of responsibility that they would have to serve our community. And we changed the job title to Bilingual Family Liaisons. So then they were able to, to apply for the position. The folks that applied for the position and were selected ultimately, they actually saw an increase in terms of salary. So we felt like because the job was a higher status and had more responsibility, that compensation should be commensurate with that increase. We were very fortunate to have had a good amount of highly qualified employees, or candidates step forward, and we were able to actually lift some candidates from the private industry. Again, we just felt like that experience that they were bringing to bear was going to pay huge for us in terms of the service that we needed to provide for the families that are in need. Some school sites actually had opted to bring a local professional into their fold. I listed two there, North High School and Capitol View. They actually hired on our BCOs to work there in those schools more permanently. When I saw Tom do the presentation earlier, he mentioned the 3D program. In fact, one of our BCOs is a graduate of that, and it's probably that graduate of the 3D program, and he's now a teaching assistant, one of our Nepali speakers. And of course, we are desperate for the low incidence languages. He was able to refer us to another Nepali speaker who also applied for the job, and we were able to hire him on. A major factor that was behind this repurposing of these resources is, again, we wanted to increase ELL teacher FTEs at the school level, and most sites did see an increase in that FTE.
If you want to go back to the history of this bilingual family liaison, at one time, Des Moines Public School, we have the native language tutor. At the time, we have about 40 plus native language tutor. But their focus at the time was very much support students inside the classroom and outside the classroom. They tutor students, they did many things that teacher asked them to do. One thing is when we are bilingual, people think that we know everything, so they are being asked to do science. We do. Absolutely, but they are being asked to do math, science, social study, and all sorts of content area. So when we repurpose to bilingual family liaison, their main focus is to really support our family. That is much more critical work that we are hoping to achieve to make sure that our family have that sense of belonging here in Des Moines Public School in the city of Des Moines.
So we also included a chart in terms of how we organized our bilingual family liaisons. Really, it was the brainchild of Vin in terms of setting it up via feeder patterns through our high schools. And so you can see there the schools and who is covered with whom in terms of language minorities. You'll also notice that towards the bottom of that chart, low incident languages, that really has not changed from the year prior or a couple years prior, and here's why. It is just so hard to find folks that are able to speak these low incident languages that really most schools, all schools I would say, did not see a change in terms of that particular service for low incident languages. We wanted to make sure that we keep those employees happy, but also give them access, or give the schools rather access to their services as well. And so then the other piece of our strategy was, again, increasing our community outreach. And so the Center of New Americans was born from that desire. And I'm going to let Vin talk about the purpose and the mission.
So the main mission for the Center for New American is to really to serve and help acclimate newly arrived language minorities family into a new environment, but also especially in the new school setting that they have. So we set out for 3 goals. Goal number 1 is to really provide the tool and direction and support to our family and community member so their children can be positively impact their academic success. Secondly, we really want to increase the engagement, but also the involvement of our language minority parent and community into our school system. The third one is to really to help them to, I should know this by heart, but I got a little bit nervous. One of the goals we want to do is to create a group at the community level, a group with the knowledge and the skill to really help us to do the work, because we figured out that we cannot do it by ourselves. We really have to get our community involved into the setting that we are providing for the children. So we are working with the community, make sure the community leader know exactly what we are doing, but also involve them into the process that we do. Very soon you are going to hear and see different community meeting throughout the school district with different language minority community leader. We actually had 2 meetings already with the Somali community and the Eritrean community. We will continue to establish more meetings with different community here in the Des Moines school system. So,
Thanks, Vin. That's actually all we have. Just opening it up for questions, I suppose.
Are there questions from board members for Vin or Pablo? Yes, Ms. Anderson.
Actually, I was wondering if, so it was restructured the way, I don't know if I heard that correctly. And then we hired, did we hire everyone back?
No.
We did not.
Okay.
Pablo mentioned that we have a high caliber staff. We are at 42, now we have 32. Their focus are different, and their job responsibility are different.
However, some of those folks were retained in other positions, though, like the office manager at Capitol View and one of the support staff at attendance office at North. Yeah.
I guess I've seen in other examples, like when we restructure, sometimes people aren't hired back, and there could be a good reason. I don't know if that's a comment. It's not really a question, but hopefully we kept the people who have been working with our students and staff for a long time, I guess. I don't know.
Other questions or comments? Yes, Ms. Langford.
I'm happy you brought that up because I've only actually heard about this a couple times in passing. And so could you just explain, like, to the board, like, what does that mean when we say restructure, and what were some of the factors that impacted that? I don't know who to.
Sure. Can I take that?
Yeah.
When we wanted to, again, increase our footprint in terms of the families and the communities that we serve, we went back to the drawing board and we looked at that job description. And there were components in the job description that had, for the bilingual community outreach worker, that had pieces where they delivered tutoring to students. And honestly, it's my belief that if we're gonna have instructional capacity, I would much rather point that towards a teaching staff, increase of FTE in terms of teaching staff. So we did that. At the same time, when we restructured that job description, there were some staff members, BCOs, that simply were not qualified under those new circumstances. But when we went out to the community, we were able to find language minority folks that were able to step up and do that job. Unfortunately, no, not all staff members were hired back. But as Vin mentioned, we feel really good about the caliber of employee that we've brought and the work that they've done thus far has far surpassed the work that was the output last year, rather, from that same staff.
Okay. And then you mentioned that term low incident languages.
Mm-hmm. Or low incidence languages.
Mm-hmm.
So
Karen,
so we have
Karini.
English, and then we have Spanish, which is the second most frequently spoken language, and then it quickly goes, the percentage of students speaking a whole bunch of other languages, hundreds of other languages, goes way down. So you may have, just a few hundred people in the community speaking a particular language.
Right.
That's what we mean by the low incident language. Not many people speak it, but we still need to educate those students.
Yeah.
And so finding qualified people who can speak both English and that language that are in a position to help support the families and the students.
For example,
It's a real challenge.
Nepali is one of our low incidence languages, and we're really happy for that staff member that was able to take advantage of the 3D program, but selfishly, we still needed that language, and so we still wanted to find someone that was able to speak Nepali, and we were able to find them.
Yeah.
Because they're hard to find.
So when we mention low incident languages, you look at the population that we have 60% Spanish-speaking population, and then the rest of the 100+ languages we have is about 40%. Sure. So you're looking at Korean, Karenni, Nepali, for example,
Arabic.
and some Arabic, some dialects that you have from East or West Africa, for example. Those are the low incident languages that we have.
Awesome. Thank you for that one-on-one. And then I remember I had the opportunity to visit Edmonds, and there was a site within Edmonds that was acclimating students that were coming to the district from another country throughout the year.
Yep.
Is the Center for New Americans focused more on the families, and is that spot in Edmonds still exist? Are they?
So the Center for New Americans is focused on newly arrived families. The center that you're talking about at Edmonds is one of, sorry, I'm doing the count on my head. It was one of 5 centers. So 1 at elementary, 1 at middle, and 3 at the high school. The 3 at the high school are still in operation. We call them IELC, Intensive English Language Centers. The 1 at the middle school is also still in operation, and the 1 at Edmonds is not. And the reason that decision was made was there was a change in national policy after the last presidential election that severely curbed the number of refugee students that were being allowed into the United States. Up to that point, the number of students that we had seen coming into this country were typically older students at the secondary level who bring wider gaps in terms of education. And in order for us to catch them up, it actually takes longer than it would, say, an elementary age student. As I mentioned before, part of the change with the job description is that we wanted to increase FTE in terms of ELL endorsed teachers, and we've done that at the neighborhood schools, who are now taking more and more of these elementary age students.
Okay. So was it more funding decision in terms of, or it was literally just like, this is?
There were at points 3 students inside a classroom,
Okay.
while other schools were just in desperate need of teaching staff. So it just was not sustainable.
Okay. Final question. I know as a board we've talked about how we focus some attention on our English language learners. And so is this the last, because since we don't have a policy specifically looking at that or a monitoring report, will we have opportunities to hear from your department again? Or as a board, I guess I'm wondering, how do we grapple with, so what does that look like? And is that something that we really value?
What we do break down in most of the 4 series reports, we do break down the ELL numbers there. But in terms of what's actually happening programmatically, we don't really have that, you're right, in a report. So I think that's something that the board will have to talk about what they would like.
And I'm just bringing it up now because I literally don't know when we're going to talk about it again. We don't have a work session, so we're at the board table, so.
And one way of thinking about it is, and I cannot remember what monitoring report it was we had over the summer, but the district chose to focus in on special education.
Mm-hmm.
And
Treatment students.
yes.
Yeah.
And I think that's a fair model for how to treat certain sections of this district.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that I want us as a board to be cautious about going back to the era of everybody needs a report and everybody gets a report. we have priorities, and we chose priorities because we think they're priorities that are going to collectively move the district forward. What the guidance that I would give is the district was wise with treatment of students to take that, trust that we were going to read the report as they presented it, but then focus their presentation around special education, because special education, just like English language learner, is not a population that we would get a report on in a year. But they used it to enlighten us about a significant population of students in the district, and then also for some self-reflection that has seemingly proven important to some of the changes y'all are looking at making. So there's a lot of ways for us to talk about this, but I would offer that counsel to my colleagues.
Yeah. I would also just ask everyone to reflect back on the prioritization that we did for work sessions for the rest of the year. And that's also a means and a mechanism for us to create opportunities for getting additional information to the extent that that's what we want to do. So again, I've made a note of it, and I'll put it on our to-do list.
Put what? Can I ask some clarification? Put what on the to-do list?
Yes, so you were wanting to figure out how we sort of do sort of a follow-up to the ELL work and getting more information so that we have a much more regular opportunity to receive input and feedback and information on how things are moving. Is that consistent with what you want? Other questions? Yes. Natasha.
You guys are doing great asking the questions that I want. I guess I want to raise, because for this, the Center for New Americans is really focused on the family. Would this not fall under the treatment of parents and the families?
We just started it, and so I couldn't
Right.
include it in.
Well,
in
we
this
just did the
past
report
monitoring
too,
report.
so.
Yeah, the report I just gave was intended to be reflective of last fiscal year, so
Right.
I tried to be careful
I'm
not to
throwing it
include
out there.
Oh, yeah, I
for
see what you're saying.
future.
Yeah.
I feel like this would be
Yeah.
great, but that's
Yep.
just
Absolutely.
just a thought.
For sure.
I think all my other questions were already asked. Sorry.
Ms. De La Gardelle Shelley.
I had some of the similar questions. However, I just want to say how excited I am about the Center for New Americans and just how well this fits in with the idea of community schools and of, starting to move towards bringing the resources from our community to our schools and really bringing our families into the fold of our schools, because we see when families, when communities, when neighborhoods are engaged with the education of kids, that kids succeed at much higher levels. So I'm very, very excited to see kind of a community schools model happening with our ELL students. And I really think, you might be leading the way in some aspects in the district in that. And I really look forward to hearing more about your success stories. And I guess I'll have to follow Phil, because maybe he'll do an article about you guys or something. So in the communications department. So I'm just really excited about this idea and what you're bringing to our kids in our community. So
thank you.
Mr. Barron?
I just want to say I think you've put together a good plan here, and I have faith in what you guys are working towards. I know change is difficult, and especially change that comes with a wholesale restructure of a department and laying off of a significant quantity of people is always creates a ripple. I've been waiting and looking forward to this presentation for a while, and I like what you all are doing. I have maybe a question or two I might ask you after the board meeting's done, but I look forward to seeing more of this work and the impact that this can make in this community, because how we invest in our families and how we invest in building leadership within the families of this district is, I believe, can pay a huge dividend, and so this is exactly aligned with that thinking, and I'm really encouraged by what you all are working towards.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? So I just had one really quick comment, and it's really sort of to the low incident languages support staff. And I think one of the things that we notice, and one of the things that is very clear, is especially with some of the newly resettled individuals, they come from underdeveloped countries where the requirements for acclimation and support are significantly greater than what you would find from students who are coming from more developed countries. So I realize that we have fewer resources that are tied to those, but I'm hoping that there are other places in the district where we're able to support those students, and I thought that maybe there might be an opportunity just to talk about other places where work in the district intersects with what's being identified here, recognizing that we can't be all things to all people, but there obviously are needs that are going to have to be met, especially for some of those newer populations where they literally are clueless about what it takes.
Do you all want to talk on that? One thing I wanted to mention is where we have, and we don't think it's the ideal location by any stretch, but on the 6th floor of Walnut Street where we have space, as you know, when we vacated that and grew Walnut Street School up through the 5th floor, we took the remaining space and we've provided extremely low lease rates for a variety of our community partners who are in need of office space and administrative space. And, you know, we're hoping to find some synergy up there with various of our partners who are officing up there right next to where our Center for New Americans is. So that's one way that we're trying to make a more immediate connect between other community supports that aren't directly tied to the school, because you're right, we can't be all things to all people. And then I don't know, this is something we can follow up on in more detail, but Allison, we don't have Allison here, but Allison Vukovic works closely with, especially with Vin and Laura Sikori on coordinating our various community partners, so we could provide richer detail on that. That's a good point to lift up.
So let me give you an example. It's very enjoyable experience when you see 16 newly arrived family from Myanmar beginning to learn English at the center. You know, this morning I actually taught the class with them, and they giggled throughout, practiced their English, and all kind of things happening there. So we work very closely with the community of school, with Mrs. Vukovic. For example, when we are doing the classes, her staff would be providing childcare, for example. And childcare is not just babysitting. We really implement and make sure that our children have educational activity along with that 2 hours. When their parents learn, they do also learn. So that's our goal, and we want to make sure that happen everywhere we provide services to. In the evening, we have 2 sites. Walnut is another site. We have about 20 plus parents. Hyatt is another site. We also have child care services. And on Saturday, if you go to Meredith, Hyatt, or Weeks, you see dozens and dozens of our parents are in classes. And so it's really a true joyful experience to see our parents eager to learn that one thing. You know, people said they can't learn English. That's not so true. They practice and they are learning. So,
Great. Well, we appreciate your efforts. Appreciate you being here tonight. Any final questions before we move to our next presentation? Great. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Okay. The next item on our agenda is item number F6, legislative priorities for the district. I would ask the superintendent to introduce the item, and I think we have a couple of friends here that may want to share information. So
yeah, so we've become more, I think, actively engaged, at least as an administration, and political advocacy on behalf of the district, and especially in the last 2 years, the board has really organized itself to be more of a force in pushing an agenda specific to DMPS. So you'll note that my proposed priorities for the 2018 legislative session look remarkably similar to last year's. And I just want to make a couple of notes before I ask Christopher Rance and John Cacciatore, who are our Policy Works representatives and provide us really excellent support in moving our agenda forward. You'll note that you don't see supplemental state aid on this list. Is supplemental state aid important to DMPS? Absolutely. Does every other educational organization that advocates have that on their list? Yes. Is that a really good way to open a discussion with a legislator about getting additional supports for ELL? No, it is not. SSA is important to us, to Des Moines, in the same way that it's important to everybody else. We have some things that we think are particularly important for DMPS, and so we've really tried to take a long game in building relationships with our, not only our Des Moines representatives and senators, but those senators and representatives who are influential on various committees and leadership roles, and make sure that they understand that we have a legitimate, unique perspective, that we do represent about 7% of the state's students, and some of the most unique circumstances in the state, and that things like ELL weighted funding is a lot more important to Des Moines than it is for most other districts. As you know, a few years ago, we were successful in getting an additional year of weighted funding. We didn't do that alone, but we led the charge on that, and we really were the coordinators of pulling together the right people to get that done. We don't think 5 is enough, so we're continuing to push for getting an additional 2 more years. Preschool, we made some headway last year. We didn't get everything we wanted, certainly. I don't think anybody did. But that's still a priority. And even if we feel like it's something that we may not be in the budget this year, it's really important, we think, to keep that in the conversation, because we still have over 1,000 4-year-olds that reside within our district those who most need a preschool experience not having it. So we need to continue to carry that torch. So with that, I'll turn it over to John and Christopher to share their thoughts, and please feel free to ask questions or interject as you all see fit.
Well, thanks, Superintendent, and it's good to see you all. I do want to touch on a little bit on some of the accomplishments from last year that built off of your priorities. When it comes to preschool funding in particular, we were able to work in collaboration with United Way and others to achieve flexibility. While there's not new money, the money that you do have is now able to be spent on more things. The definition has been broadened with our input, and move money to the things that the Des Moines district or other districts believe is more important, which is useful. Similarly, the categorical funds that kind of kept the district in a straitjacket in certain areas of funding, we're able to work with the Iowa School Board Association to loosen that up again, so that the district has more flexibility to put the dollars where it's more important to you all. Lastly, while it's not on this page, and actually, Superintendent, it wasn't on the page last year either, and that is regarding your pension system. That issue was completely unique to the Des Moines School District. There's no other district that had a legacy pension system, and we were able to work with the legislature to pass authorization that allowed you all to move your pension system and merge it into IPERS. And since it was absolutely unique to you, those are even more difficult things to pass than some others.
Yeah,
so we were really proud. We were proud of that, of being able to get that done.
That was a difficult forward change to state code.
So that's kind of where we pivot from 2017 into 2018. Christopher, would you like to add?
As the superintendent says, part of our message always with legislators is why Des Moines is unique, particularly because most legislators come from districts that are very unlike Des Moines, right? I mean, they don't have a concept of the number of kids you have at risk, number of kids in poverty, number of kids who come to this school district that have no background with English as their primary language and may not have even been educated in their own language. And so part of what we always have to do is try to explain why Des Moines is unique. And honestly, I think that is helpful to us in terms of trying to make headway on some of these very specific items. Because they do acknowledge it, it's not something they live every day, right? If you're in Pella or Hull, Iowa, or Decora. I mean, you're facing a very different set of challenges in your school district that they don't hear from their superintendents about, or they're not talking about. And I'm glad the superintendent brought up supplemental state aid, because I'll be honest, until the legislature makes some changes in how they deal with supplemental state aid and prioritizing it, and that is a conversation that this district started last year, that we started with them, the chairs of the education committee, about why pay every school district the same, as if every kid comes to school ready to learn, as if every kid is starting out at the same level. Is that really the best thing to focus on? I mean, while you care, I'm not suggesting you don't care about supplemental state aid, but should you care until they actually make some changes in the formula that identifies kids at risk and puts more of a weighting on that? Otherwise, you're doing a great job at trying to get more money for West Des Moines or Ankeny, or not that those school districts don't need the money too, right? I'm from Sioux City. We all need the resources. But part of what we started to do last year was to educate some of the key legislators about the fact of the increase of at-risk kids, using poverty as a factor to identify those kids. And the tool that we've been using is sort of a heat map that shows the growth in free and reduced lunch programs across the state, and the percentage of kids that are involved in that. And it's not just an urban issue. We can talk to rural legislators because it's a rural issue as well. And so we get their eyes open on that. But part of what we want to talk to them about in the future is how you change that formula. The state of Iowa is long overdue on revisiting that formula. It's because it's tough, it's difficult, nobody wants to deal with those really sticky issues. But at a time when they don't have any resources, and bear in mind the legislative session in January is going to start with revisiting last year's budget and making more budget cuts, and filling the hole where Governor Reynolds had to transfer funds in from the Economic Emergency Fund. At a time when the legislators are going to acknowledge that they don't have any money, and we're always honest with them, we say, we know you don't have additional resources, so how can we best spend the resources you do have to make the biggest difference with kids? And that is looking at redividing that pie for kids at risk, looking at adding an additional year for ELL kids, looking at SAVE. And that's why, because that is something that doesn't cost the state a penny,
Nice.
but could make a big difference. And again, we had a conversation in the governor's office. John and I weren't there, but I know you guys acquitted yourselves well. And we're having a follow-up conversation next week with some of the other stakeholders in that issue. That is the kind of opportunity that legislators have to help local school districts and make a difference without stressing their own resources. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy, right? Election year, and some people still see it as a tax issue. But that's one that really ought to be at the top of the list. And again, we have a unique story to tell, in part because of the age of the buildings, the fact that you're at your bonding cap, and the method in which you're using those dollars with your 5-year plans to demonstrate to the public that you're spending the money wisely.
Questions from the board? Comments? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion.
So I just want to clarify here. We will be convening our legislative committee, Heather, Deanna, and myself, and a part of that will be getting our CLAT group moving again. And this more just for a point of clarification for everyone around the table is that once we approve this is the board's agenda, therefore it is that committee's agenda, CLAT's agenda. CLAT has no power to change that legislative agenda. So just only the board does. So just knowing that this now becomes our committee agenda as well, just kind of for clarification there.
Thank you for that. I would entertain a motion to approve the 2018 legislative priorities.
I'll move approval.
We have a motion from Ellsburn and a second from Barron. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, please vote. Motion carries 7-0. Thank you very much for being here tonight. We look forward to working with you.
Thank you
for the time.
We appreciate it.
Okay, I think that was our last item of business, so a couple of just housekeeping things. I would just call everyone's attention to the items that are in the information only. We have some preliminary plans for school improvement projects at Jackson, Coles, and Madison schools. We also have the Head Start Policy Committee minutes. This is also the place where our board committee reports will reside once those are generated, and I'm hoping to get a fillable PDF of that document to make it easier for people to complete and submit to Deb. So just expect to be seeing that. The only other comment that I would have is I know we have our CFO, our superintendent, and one of our board members heading off to the Council of Great City Schools here in the next day or two. So go and do good and come back with great information and be even more armed and dangerous when you return. How's that? I don't know that I have anything else to report. I do have a follow-up that I'm going to be sending to the board following our work session last week that just, again, reminds everyone of those things that we've identified as priorities for work sessions and other things that we've identified as priorities for our own board development. And there was one other thing. I'm not remembering what it was. I should have written it down. At any rate, those are the things that I have to share, and I'll turn it over to the superintendent for his report.
Well, I've fallen out of the habit in my memos of reminding board members about all the wonderful activities that our students are engaged in, and this is just a last-minute reminder that we are nearing the end of our fall sports seasons. So we have volleyball going on, and football and cross country, and we have some outstanding young people doing some amazing things on the field, including our musicians. And so if the weather holds, we have another weekend coming up where you can enjoy some live entertainment and cheer on our wonderful DMPS students.
Great. I do remember the one other thing I wanted to mention. So we will not be doing agenda planning tomorrow. That'll be delayed until after the superintendent, Cindy, and Tom get back from the council. So we likely will not do that until next week. So you won't be getting anything from me as a follow-up until then. But I will send out tomorrow the board meeting evaluation so that we can have feedback on tonight's meeting and any things that we want to point up for change, et cetera, moving forward. So you can expect to get that from me tomorrow via SurveyMonkey. Is there anything else? Board comments? Hearing none, and without objection, we are adjourned.